I want to give you some tips in terms of managing or coping with the workload as a PhD student or as any researcher, whether you're a full professor or a PhD student or graduate student of any type. And this is a problem that we often face. And what I'm going to do is give you key moments in terms of when you actually should be thinking about managing this workload. So coming into a PhD program, thinking about financing, for example, conducting your research and then sort of completing what you are wanting to complete. And this is where I'm going to talk to you and get you to think about who you are as a person and what that means. So the first thing that I want you to imagine is that when I say tips for dealing with the workload as a PhD student or a professor, you are assuming that the work is happening to you. You're assuming that the external environment is pushing on you and you have no control over the circumstance. And you're really, really desperately thinking about how do I deal with this? But I want you to think about this in a completely different way. And this is, how do I create the world that I truly love and create myself, this person of who I am, as somebody that I love inside? And I know that this is a squishy thing. Researchers don't like squishy things, but I know that some of those squishy things are actually really real. They are real in my life. And I know that they're probably real in your life as well. So by the way, if you don't know me, I am Professor Dave Maslach. I'm Associate Professor of Innovation. And I'm trying to create this whole reciprocity project. So go on to the platform. It's basically, I want to create a platform to create non-rejectable research papers and grants. That's ultimately it. And as you're doing it, you're going to have fun and it's going to be a really great experience. All right. So what are these tips for coping with the workload of a PhD student? So first of all, we got to acknowledge that that is a lot, right? Like you often get a lot of stuff that are thrown at you. One of the best pieces of advice, particularly when I was coming into a PhD student, but I didn't know this. I wanted to apply everywhere, is to simply acknowledge that you're limited and that you're an imperfect human being. And that means you don't have the time and resources to apply everywhere. But I'm going to encourage you to do that, right? Particularly if you're thinking about getting financing, you want to apply as many places as you possibly can. But if you don't get to it, I want you to think about, like, how do I shed the guilt, the feelings of I'm not good enough, I'm not going to accomplish anything. How do I shed that? And that's where you simply just say, I am who I am, and I'm going to do my best possible. I'm going to do my best. And I know you're going to get overwhelmed, right? I get overwhelmed all the time, but I simply say, well, I can't get to it. I am the best person that I can be at this moment. And I know that's squishy. I know all of this is squishy, but it's very much a change of thinking of guilt, which the whole profession is guilt and shame and feeling bad of, like, you're not being good enough. Like, I always have this sort of imaginary person in my head is like somebody finger shaming at me. But I want you to remove all of that and say, I am who I am. I can get to the best I possibly can. And so you apply to as many different grants, you apply to as many PhD programs and as many of those things as you possibly can. And then you simply say, if you can't get to it, you're like, I'm good enough. I did the best that I possibly can be given the situation that I'm actually in. And that's a hard thing for all of us to admit and to think about, is what does that mean? Now, you thought that was the bulk of the work. It's actually not. Once you get into the program, you're going to be inundated with information, and I'm not lying. Like, expect to read 200-300 pages a week. Expect to read, and then that's on top of writing, and your expectation is going to be writing 10 pages a day, right? These are really crazy high expectations, but that's ultimately what it is, right? If you are competing at the world stage. That's really what it is often, is writing masses amount and reading an unbelievable amount. And I know that feels painful when you're thinking about that and hearing about that, but that's the job, right? There's less. This is one thing that I thought there was going to be all this analytical work and, you know, I was going to do all this kind of interesting stuff. It's not true. It's mostly reading and writing. I am an engineer. I love numbers. I love, you know, doing that kind of stuff. But most of my job is reading and writing, which is something that I've always struggled at. I've gotten better, but I've always struggled at. But that's where I need to. So for me, of coping with doing this research, I get all that information and you just have to be forgiving of yourself, right? Like, ultimately, you're thinking at this moment is all of this shame that's coming up is I'm not good enough, I am the problem, you know, all of those emotions, and somebody might be telling you that. Well, I want you to distance yourself as far away from that person as possible and use every mechanism to distance yourself as far away as possible and find the group, find individuals that you feel comfortable with, that you can love who you are and love other people who they are, because you're not going to get to everything, right? Like that's the message. Science is ever expanding. Research is ever expanding. It's growing and it's growing more rapidly. I saw like statistics that the number, I can't remember what it was, but it was something like where we're expected to read, you know, at basically like fourfold than 20 years ago of the amount of information that is available on this. Not to mention like the information that's on the internet, like sort of pop culture stuff. It's growing exponentially. And this continues to grow exponentially. So you can't get to all of the information. That's where you just have to practice a lot of, you know, just inner peace inside where you're saying, I'm okay. And you allocate time to yourself, a small amount of time, whatever that might be. That's, you know, maybe it's eating dinners, maybe it's having a half an hour to watch television and unwind, and then you go from there. You allocate time for exercise and you get to as much as you possibly can, and you let the rest of it, oh, well, it's not my problem to deal with. And you can't take that burden inside. If you do, it's not going to work out for you in the long run. It's taking that burden of doing all of this work. You're not a robot. And if anybody ever tells you that, you distance yourself. You do the old straight arm, I don't know, in like football and stuff. You know, you do the straight arm where you're pushing back against the world and you say, I'm good enough. And you repeatedly do that. Now, if you notice the theme here, there is no tip that is like, this is what you, like the way that people talk about this stuff is like astronomically ridiculous online, that there is some sort of mechanical efficiency way of dealing with this stuff. And it's not true. You will try to do all of those efficiency tips and all of those things, and you're going to regret it. You're not going to be able to implement any of those things. It's like checklists and timelines. You can't do that stuff. That's ridiculous to even think about doing that on a regular basis. It's just more work. Like the solution to being overworked is more work. Like, come on. You know, that's stupid. What you need to do is pull back and allocate time for yourself and be okay with allocating time. You pick the amount. It's arbitrary. And if people are making you feel bad about any of this stuff, man, what kind of a person is that? I want you to remember that. Like, that's not a high quality person. Like, they should be there to support you and say, you know what? I understand where you're coming from. Let's work with this. This is what you can do. Let's go forward. Now, in terms of completing your PhD, completing what you're entitled, what you want to do, well, that's where you just continuously and unrelentlessly work towards that goal where you, okay, I can't write 10 pages a day. That's my target. I can't do that on a regular basis, but I can sure as hell do one word. I can write one word today, and that one word turns into two, right? And I want you to think about that. What is the minimum that I can do to actually get there, and repeatedly do that and make things small, right? Like right now you're thinking of this workload that's enormous, and you'll, like it's unrelentless, like you're overwhelmed at this moment. Just start small, like do something tiny. That's how you actually accomplish a lot. And by the way, that's what programmers do when they build a big program, whatever. You pick the little tiny thing and you see if you can accomplish that little tiny thing, and then you move forward from there. So hopefully this helps you out in terms of, it's a staged process of dealing with this. None of this has anything to do with more efficiency tools or anything like that. It's a matter of reframing how you think about yourself. And once you do that, when you reframe how you think about yourself, you're going to accomplish a lot in this world. All right, take care and have a wonderful day. Bye.